Hello, my name is Mark Hauser, the Ecology Outreach Manager with Friends of the Chicago River. I'd like to welcome you to Creating a Litter-Free Chicago Calumet River System. This workshop is proudly presented by the Center for Great Lakes Literacy and by Friends of the Chicago River. It is focused on the issue of litter in our river from a teacher's perspective, teaching a litter-free curriculum, leading a litter-free service learning project, including workdays, and collecting litter-free data for academic research and for classroom lessons. Friends of the Chicago River is a member of the Litter-Free Chicago and Calumet River Task Force. This extraordinary partnership also includes the Mars Wrigley Foundation, the Shedd Aquarium, Loyola University Chicago, the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District of Greater Chicago, REI, and Waste Management. Our featured presenter for this video is Mr. Micah Zaker. Micah teaches science and social science to middle school students at Gunsaulus Scholastic Academy. He'll be talking about developing and teaching a litter-free curriculum.
Hi, everyone. I hope you are enjoying it. My name is Micah. I am a 6th, 7th, and 8th grade science and social science teacher at Gunsaulus Scholastic Academy. Can you all see my screen? Can I get a thumbs up? Yeah, okay. So I'll give you a little bit of a background. I did my undergrad at Loyola, where I worked with Dr. Holline around the research of anthropogenic litter and how we teach it. And so I have like this theoretical background, and then I, as part of my research in undergrad, developed a litter-free curriculum unit that I now have been teaching for 4 years to middle school and high school students. And so I'm going to kind of talk to you a little bit about today. A couple of things. First, why teaching about anthropogenic litter is important. What are some next generation science standards and curriculum topics that are aligned to teaching about anthropogenic litter? So like if we're thinking like how we design a unit plan, what is those stage 1, stage 2 goals? And then also like showcasing and like helping you guys reflect and brainstorm on how you teach about litter in your context. And so the first part is going to be a little more the theoretical, like thinking about the behind the scene things. And then part 3, we're really going to dive into, what do I do to teach about litter? And so I'm really excited to be here with you all today. And if you have any questions, like please just throw them into the chat throughout the presentation. And we'll go from there. And so the first thing I would love is, why should we teach about anthropogenic litter? I would love it if you could throw it in the chat. It's shaping the world we live in. It's gross and we can do something about it. Those are really great. Connecting kids to their impact. Yeah, for sure, right? How are we aware of the impact we have? Educate our future generations, for sure. The effects on human health. Yeah, that's a really big one. Empowering students. Knowledge is power for change. Yeah, 100%, right? Those are all really great examples of why we should teach about anthropogenic litter. And so as part of my like learning and research as a student, I developed some enduring understandings, or what are those key scientific ideas that we want our students to understand about litter. And so the first one there is that litter is global, pervasive, everywhere, increasing, and permanent. And Tim, I'm sure this sounds very familiar because I worked with you to develop these, but the idea is that litter is everywhere. It is a problem and it is going to be here for a while. And so making sure that our students understand that is what we're trying to solve. That's the problem that we as students, as educators, as future thinkers of the world, this is what we're trying to do. The second thing is that we need to measure litter. We need to understand what it's doing, how it's affecting environments, who is it hurting, so that we can take action, so that we can develop policies, so that we can manage this issue of litter. We need to understand what's going on. And so that really is the core of where the science is taking place. And so when we're teaching about litter, we need to be teaching about the data. We need to collect the data. We need to think about systems and models and how litter is moving through our ecosystem, our biosphere, and like how to improve that. We also need to think about this big understanding is that we are all collectively responsible for litter. However, there are many industries that perpetuate our unsustainable consumption culture, and they need to be held accountable, right? One of my big things is, yes, litter is a personal problem, but it is a systematic issue first and foremost, right? There is an increase in plastic production, there's an increase in plastic consumption, and that is a system that is causing our world to be unsustainable and disrupting the ecosystems and the social, like the environmental balances of our world. And so it's not just a personal issue, although we can manage our own personal consumption. What's really required is for there to be systematic changes to the production and consumption of litter, specifically plastics. And our first thing is that change is possible, right? We can enact laws, we can do culture shifts, we can change individual behaviors, and we can create new products. And that is how we are going to address the issue of litter. And so these 4 big enduring understandings are what I'm hoping my students are getting out of the course of our unit on litter and the water system. And so what I'm really interested in as a teacher is helping students develop and understand scientific phenomena as a way of learning about the natural world. And so litter is a really great phenomenon. It is a really great scientific concept to help us understand and explore our world around us. And so how is this aligned to teaching our curriculum? As science teachers, many of you are here as science teachers, we have to think about how is this aligned to our curriculum? How are we meeting their standards? How is this something that our principal is going to be okay with us teaching and is meeting the expectations of our school districts? And so I have really identified, like, if I am teaching a unit on litter, there are 4 big science topics that I think litter can really thoroughly be taught about. And this can be, you could teach it all 4 of these, or you could choose one. So the first big thing is the earth systems, and I'll talk a little bit about that. The second is around plastics production and consumption. Our third one is about ecosystem disruptions. And then our fourth one is about human impact on the environment. And so as a science teacher, I specifically focus on, like, how is litter impacting earth systems? And then in social science, when I'm teaching social science, we look at our behaviors of consumption and like global connections, right? And so there's also really great ways if you're talking an ecology unit, to think about ecosystems, and then also thinking about human impact on the environment, which, as an environmental scientist, my biggest thing is that no matter what subject or science you're teaching, human impact on the environment is part of that. And so if we're thinking about earth systems and disruptions, and so if you're teaching a unit about the earth systems and disruptions, your essential question, your big question you could be trying to answer in this unit is, how does litter move through the earth systems? So if you're in 2nd grade or 5th grade or middle school, or even high school, you might be developing models that are showing how water and wind are moving litter through the earth system. So you might be looking at the geosphere, the biosphere, the hydrosphere, the atmosphere. You'll be learning those science concepts, but at the same time, you're studying, okay, how is litter moving through, or is moved around Earth by the hydrosphere, by the atmosphere? How is the water cycle perpetuating the movement of litter from land into our water body? So how is, the water cycle, right? When it rains, litter on land is being moved into the rivers and lakes of Chicago, and that's where we're measuring it, right? You might be in high school doing these computational representations. So you're really looking at data and constructing those understandings of how litter is moving through the systems. And so this is the first big ideas. Litter is in our earth systems and it's moving through them. And so you can study the science of those earth systems to also study how litter is moving in it. A second one is on plastics and consumption. And so a research question that you could guide for your unit is, how is plastic produced, consumed, and managed? And this can really rely on some chemistry standards. And so in my unit on litter, my students are learning a little bit of chemistry about the types of plastics. And so in 2nd and 4th and middle school and high school, you could be looking at, how is plastic made? What is the chemical processes that plastic is produced? How is it coming from a natural resource, right? Plastic is coming from oil and then being turned into a synthetic or man-made resource that is then changing the environment. And looking at those specific issues of plastic and designing solutions to it. This one is really awesome too, as a way to teach what is my personal consumption, which I'll talk a little bit more in the second half of the presentation, but really talking about how is plastic produced. I think kids find it really interesting when they learn plastic comes from something, right? And that's where is it coming from? Because as we saw in Tim's presentation, we're increasing the amount of plastic that is produced. and therefore we're consuming more of that plastic. But where is plastic coming from? And how does it interact in the ocean, for example, right? How does the plastic interact as microplastics in a food web? And so that connects to our third topic, which could be about ecosystem disruptions. And so our essential question could be something like, how does litter disrupt an ecosystem? So we're looking at, if we're thinking about microplastics or how plastic is consumed by animals, that is going to disrupt the ecosystem, right? If a bird is eating, or a fish is eating some plastic that is in the Chicago River, and then a bird eats that fish, that plastic is now inside the bird. And so you can teach about the food web, you can teach about life cycles, you can teach about how organisms are growing, and then therefore how abiotic or non-living parts of an ecosystem that are brought by humans, that anthropogenic litter, is disrupting that ecosystem. And then you can also think about how that impacts biodiversity. And so if you're connecting litter to this idea of ecology and ecosystems, that's another really valuable method of teaching about litter in your classrooms. The final topic that I litter is human impact on the environment. And this one is really fun personally for teaching because I like to do this as an engineering design unit. So how can we design a way to reduce human impact on the environment? And so if we're thinking about it as a design challenge, that's a really powerful way for students, is to help them think about, okay, we've learned about litter. Now I'm going to get some information. I'm going to develop a solution to this problem. And so they're going to design methods of reducing human impact. Maybe that's a giant net that they're going to use to scrape plastic out of the ocean. Or maybe it's a new water filtration system that they're putting on a washing machine to stop microplastics, right? The students want to explore and want to design a solution because they're motivated by it, right? All of our other presentations have talked about litter is there, kids want to solve it. And that's my big takeaway too, is if you're ever teaching about litter, make sure that there's a way that kids are solving the solution, are providing a solution, because that's the most motivating for our students. And so that was very brief, and I have a bunch of resources in the folder that kind of hit on these topics. But if you had to think about, if you were a teacher or you are a teacher, where do you think you could teach about litter in the curriculum that you have right now? Throw that into the chat. Where might you be able to teach about litter? As a science teacher, I know America is here, she's a first grade teacher in literacy, in social studies, in senior level graduate biology class. How can you see teaching about litter in what you teach currently? Or how can you add litter to what you teach currently? I'm going to find the chat again because it disappears when you're presenting. Oop, there we go. Yeah, being a responsible citizen for social science, correct. Yeah, that's a great way. Yeah, connecting to climate change around fossil fuels and the global scale of the problem, for sure. Yeah, the chemistry unit. So yeah, Kimber's saying the chemistry unit of what is plastics? How is plastics produced? How are they in our ecosystem, for sure. Yeah, the CPUP physical science unit has a unit on plastics, for sure. I think that's that first chemistry unit if you're using CPUP at your school. Right, I know if some people might be using Amplify, I think Amplify also has a material science unit as well, depending on what your curriculum is. Or if you're at a school like my school where we don't have a science curriculum and it's all teacher directed, I can totally share a unit that I wrote on how to teach about anthropogenic litter. And so when we think about litter, there's so many ways you can teach it. And so what are some ways to teach about anthropogenic litter? I'm going to share how I teach about litter. So I'll give you a little bit of background. So I teach 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, and one of my units in 6th grade is all about human impact on the environment, the water cycle, wind movement, and litter. And so this is our unit on anthropogenic litter and water. And so they're studying a variety of things, but how it breaks down to is we're looking at how does litter move from our community into the Chicago River, and potentially into the ocean, and how are we getting the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, and thinking about how our water systems are this vessel, or one might say the vector of litter movement. And so what I'm going to talk a little bit about today is like, what are the things I'm doing? And I framed this around the 8 next generation science standard practices. So science teachers, you'll know there are 8 science practices, and those 8 science practices help inform how we teach about science. It's the things that kids are doing in our classrooms. And so I've kind of framed it around that. Also, I will share that my classroom, my school in Brighton Park, we're landlocked. We're not by the Chicago River, right? We're not very close at all. We're in the middle of an urban neighborhood. And so a lot of what I have done in this curriculum is, how do I get my students to think about litter in our neighborhood and on our school campus? And so you'll see some of those examples as well. And so the first thing I have here is asking questions and defining problems, which is the first thing that we do. And so what you want to do is you want students to be engaged in a phenomenon with a shock, right? We want students to go, wow, what is going on? And so I have 3 pictures down here. This one of the bird is perhaps you've probably seen all of these pictures before, but it's just litter in the environment and how it's disrupting the ecosystem, right? This bird is full of plastic. It died because it had eaten so much plastic, it was not getting any more nutrients, and it's dead, right? There's plastic along the Chicago River here. This is in the park in Chinatown, and there's plastic killing this fish in the river. And so you want students to be shook, right? You want them to be like, oh my gosh, what's going on? How is this happening? And then you want them to start asking questions. And so with my students, I show videos of like a beach cleanup along Lake Michigan after, a particular summer party or whatever. And it's like, look at all of this litter. And we have them develop these questions. And when they develop these questions, we as a class synthesize these into our research questions. So throughout the course of our science unit, my 6th graders are driving our unit by trying to research these questions. And every year the questions are a little bit different, but they're the same basic principle of, how is litter dangerous? What are the types of litter? How much litter is there? Why do people litter? How does litter change over time? When did it start? How does litter travel? And can we solve this problem? The students want to figure this out. And by helping them ask these big questions, and we frame them, we put them in our room, and every day we think about, what is the question we're trying to solve today when we're in our science class, helps them connect themselves to this issue of litter in our community. And so we ask these questions, and when we've asked these questions, now we're thinking like a scientist. What we're doing next is we're going to start to develop models. Oh, I forgot I had this slide. So also, as you know, I was teaching remotely for coronavirus for the last 2 years. So I haven't taught my litter unit in person in 2 years, but we taught it virtually. And as you can see here, this is one of the Padlets that we made, where we were looking at our question board. So the students started by asking a bunch of questions about litter. And then as a class, we were going in and categorizing our questions into these larger research questions. So you can see like all of the red questions are questions about litter and plastic. All of the orange questions are questions on human impact. The green ones are about oceans, lands, and atmospheres. The blue ones are about solving the problem. And so every kid is bringing their own questions, and then we're putting them into these bigger research questions that help us define and go through our science unit. How are we going to, act? How are we going to plan out what it is that we are doing in our science unit? And if you don't use Padlet, it's really great. Resource, middle school, high school, super fun. And so, oh man, okay, there we go. Next up, we want to start by developing and using models. So we have this idea of litter. We've asked our questions, but now we're trying to figure out, what do we do about it? What's going on? And so you want to develop an initial model. So if you see down here, you can see this is the model that my students get, where they're trying to make a prediction. There's our school in Brighton Park. How does litter in Brighton Park, how is it potentially getting into the Chicago River? How is it getting into Lake Michigan? And so they're trying to model it. These are some of my students in my summer school course that I teach on litter at high school. I teach a course on litter over the summers, and this is them 2 summers ago. They're doing that modeling on whiteboards, which is really great method and tool. And then you can see down here, here's like an example of what the students are modeling. So this is an example of their like showing how garbage is being picked up and it's leaving a dumpster and it's getting blown around, and then that is what's moving it into the water. And then also throughout the unit, you want to create these models of natural systems to explain how litter is moved around the earth. So what we want to be doing is like, we are learning the water cycle. And so now my students are learning the water cycle. And so they'll create a water cycle model. But then we're going to go back in, and in a later part of the year, we're going to add litter to that water cycle so that they're understanding that science of the water cycle. But then now they're catching the phenomenon, oh, if the water cycle is helping to move litter. And so we need to think about how this model, right, the quintessential water cycle model that you'll do in middle school, is actually very different now because there are plastics in that water cycle. And so how do we change this natural cycle of the water cycle? Now we have to add plastics to it because that's what's happening. That's what we're seeing as scientists. And so the best thing to do, though, is like we've developed our models. Now we need to investigate. We need to find data. And so we want to plan and carry out investigations. And so these are some pictures of my babies from multiple years collecting litter. And the big thing here is we conduct a school-wide campus litter collection. So we're not by the Chicago River, but what we do is, as a class, we broke our school campus into 6 distinct areas, and we break off into groups to collect litter in those 6 distinct areas every week. And then we take that litter and we are historically tracking that litter collection, the types, the amounts. We use that litter tracking document that was shared earlier to say, like, this is the type of litter we're finding around our school. And then what we've also done is we have gotten our whole school community, well, pre-COVID, our whole school community was involved in this. So as our school, our kindergarten through 8th graders will be assigned a different week throughout the school year that they go outside and they clean up litter around our school community, and then they are tracking that data. So as a 6th grade class, even though I only teach about litter at the last quarter, in quarter 4, we get data that our whole school has collected and then prepare graphs of that data from the entire school year. And that's like part of our litter data. So as we're learning about our natural systems and we're learning about litter, we're now being able to show data of like, this is happening in our community. This is the types of litter we're finding on our school campus. This is where it's from. These are the brands that are producing it. You also want to like participate in a Lake Michigan beach or Chicago River cleanup day, right? That's a really great hands-on authentic learning experience that connects kids to the wider phenomenon or the wider issue of litter. And so that's a great thing, is like bringing your kids out there to do a field trip helps you like connect to that, but then also like still collecting litter at your school is really important. And then you also want to investigate other phenomena, right? Maybe you're looking at how is litter in an ecosystem. Maybe you're studying, the types of plastics that are involved, right? You're experimenting with plastics. You're thinking about how plastics are produced. And I put on there experimenting with bioplastics. That's like a really fun solution. Is like, how can we make a plastic that is biodegradable? Is a really useful like thought process. The kids can learn about polymers, they can learn about monomers, they can think about how do we make a biodegradable plastic as a solution to this problem. And I have some more pictures of that later. So after we've collected some litter right here, right? And we've sorted it, you can see this says cloth, there's glass there, metal, and there's my babies, the kiddos, right? We all get our gloves on and we take that litter around our campus, and then we spend the whole day sorting it and kind of going through like what types of litter we have. After we've done that, we're really going to organize that data. And so we take our trackers and we plug them into a spreadsheet. And so we're determining the types of litter, the origins, the product materials, the brands, and we're looking at trends and over time, right? And so we have this data for an entire school year, and we have that data for an entire school year for right now of 2 school years. So hopefully this year when we're getting this back up and started, I'll have like 3 years of data that the 6th graders can like add their own data to. So it also really builds this cool connection of like, oh, we're researching litter as a school. We're trying to change our impact as a school, not just as a class. And we have data that goes back from when my sibling was in 6th grade or when I was in 2nd grade with my teacher collecting litter, right? And it's really cool to engage kids over time. And especially if you're starting a litter program at your school, like you're going to be collecting this data around your campus, like connecting with little kids, right? 1st, 2nd, 3rd graders, they find it really interesting to go on a class walk and pick up litter and then talk about what the types of litter we found are, right? That's a really great way to engage kids. It's very tactile. You get them outside, they're thinking about it as a class, and then they know that that data is brought to the middle schoolers, where the middle schoolers are going to take that data and start doing that data analysis. And study the types of plastics and data around plastic production. That one was really interesting, as my kids find it really interesting to be like, what are the types of plastics? how is plastics produced? That data, that the graph that Tim showed of like the increases in data over time, or the increases of plastic production over time, is really powerful. The kids are really into that. They're like, why is that going on? What is that happening? And I think anytime you can show authentic data, students are inherently more like, okay, what's happening? And so if you can't tell, my big thing here is like making sure kids are leading this investigation. They are the ones who are asking the questions as researchers because they are the scientists. When we have this data, now we've collected this data, we've got it as a class. I also use this to teach mathematical skills. So we talk about graphing. We learn how to graph first on paper, and then we learn how to graph digitally. So using computers to create constructions of that litter data. This is really helpful for kids because graph literacy skills is something that is super important for students, and we teach them how to make graphs, how to analyze graphs. And so using that mathematics and computational thinking is a great skill to teach in middle school. The other thing we do is we measure our consumption personally, nationally, and globally. So what we do is we track what products are we consuming over a 24-hour period. Then we create ratios and proportions of those products relative to the mass that we occupy. So if I am wasting, let's say, I don't know, 2 kilograms of waste a day relative to, let's say, the 60 kilograms that a sixth grader weighs, what is that telling me? How long is it going to take for me to produce enough waste that covers the mass that I am? And so like, that's a really tangible, like, oh, wow moment for kids, because they're seeing I'm producing this amount of waste. And in, 30 days, in 1 month, I produce more waste than I myself weigh, right? Like that is really interesting for kids, or I myself mass. And then we look at like, what are trends in consumption and, globally, nationally, locally. And then we have kids like do this with their parents, like measure the mass or the weight of the garbage bags that they're throwing out every day. And like, just like, how much garbage did your family throw out this week? And every time like you throw a bag out, you get on the scale and you weigh how much garbage that is. And then you bring that data, and then we talk about, okay, what's going on with that? So that's like a really cool way of like connecting kids and their families to like, oh, we're wasting a lot, right? And a lot of times that garbage, maybe they're recycling, but also measure your recycling too. And so then you take that, and we're really thinking about like, how is this all connected, and what's going on there is really important. Sorry, I think I'm talking very fast. And if I am, just like be like, slow down a little. And so we have this mathematics and computational thinking. And so the next big thing is like, we've done some research, we've collected litter, we've learned about our water systems, we've learned about how plastics are produced. And what we're going to do is we're going to construct explanations, and we're going to design a solution. And so kids need to demonstrate their understanding, right? I want to know, did you learn the water cycle? Did you learn about how plastics are produced? Did you learn about how the wind moves plastics? And so this is where you can get them to construct an explanation. How is litter moved around the earth is a really great question, like explain to me how you're doing that. And you can see down here, I've got like a vocab checklist. I've differentiated a claim evidence reasoning. So there's a lot of strategies there. And there's an example of this kind of document that was shared in the resources. And that's like really great for kids. Like, explain to me what's going on. And then also, what we want to do is we want to design a solution, right? I said kids are inherently motivated to design a solution. So these are 2 pictures. So this is my classroom 2 years or 3 years ago now. This is every of the kids are in different groups constructing a solution to the problem. So I had some groups that were producing water filters. I had some groups that were designing bioplastics. I had a group that just was like, we're going to make a really big net and we're going to drive around the river and pick it up. And I was like, that's a great idea. You know what? You're not wrong. Design me a net that is going to be strong enough to tow a bunch of river waste, right? And then up here, this is another group. This group was really interesting. They designed a filter to put on the end of a washing machine that collected microplastics and microfibers, like plastic fibers from clothing. And it was really cool. So they like designed this device out of PVC. You would stick like your washing machine like drain pipe in there, and it would just filter out microplastics, and it had a removable microplastics filter. So you could like scrape them off to prevent them from getting into our water systems. And so like the kids designed that. That's what they wanted to do as their like project to solve the issue of litter. And I was like, let's do it. And so like, as you can see, I let a bunch of 6th grade boys play with a saw in class, which may have not been my best strategy, but it was authentic, and we learned a lot from that experience. The other thing that I like to do is have kids argue with it. And so one of the things that I have my students do is prepare persuasive speeches, on litter using what we've researched and collected data, and then debate it as a class, right? And as part of this too, we generate counterclaims. So people are going to say this isn't a problem. How do we rationally argue with someone who doesn't agree with human impact on the environment or who doesn't agree with climate change? How do we debate them and engage in argument and provide evidence in a respectful and calm and kind way? And so that's one of the skills I teach too, is like, let's develop these counterclaims to prevent litter misinformation. And then also, this is a screenshot of a video. I had a group design like a public service announcement that they were going to play on our morning announcements at our school, because we have digital morning announcements. And so they like designed a PSA where they were effectively making an argument for why we need to stop consuming plastics. And like, that's a really great skill too for kids, is like arguing from the evidence. We spend our whole unit collecting this data, analyzing this data, understanding Earth systems. Now argue for why it's important. And that also ties into with the last science practice, which is to evaluate information. And so once my kids have learned the science and they've learned about litter, I have them present it to different classes around the school. And so they have designed their solution and they go out and they give a presentation to other classrooms. And so you can see this group is presenting on a water filter they designed. This group is talking about the garbage patch net. Maybe they create an infographic that we hang up around our school. And then I have them research other sustainability topics and other areas for which they can like communicate information about the issues of litter. And so I know that was a lot, and I know that that was like a lot of things that I'm doing, and this is like a 10-week unit, right? So we're doing a lot of things in this 10-week, but like the big things that I think are this: teaching about human impact is important. That's the biggest thing. You have to teach about human impact on the environment. It's the most important thing we can do as educators. And I would argue that it is the most important science, is to talk about sustainability in the environment. Second point, students are inherently motivated to solve a problem, and anthropogenic litter is a large, persistent problem. Kids want to provide a solution. And so the more you can get them to think about providing a solution and solving a problem, the more engaged they're going to be in your curriculum, the more focused they're going to be, and the more questions they're going to ask. And that's what we want from our kiddos. We want them to ask research questions. And that, you know, when we investigate litter as a science phenomenon, it is the thing that anchors our science unit. It allows us to teach science skills and content, but then also engage students in research and action. Because like what my sixth graders are doing is a year-long research project on litter, and they're doing the work that actual sciences are doing, right? Dr. Holline's research lab is collecting litter, analyzing the data, and presenting it. That's what the students are doing, and that's the process of science. And so I think it's just really important that we allow time for our kids to be scientists and think like a scientist and act like a scientist. And I hope that I was able to show you some of the ways that I do that. So if you have any questions, I know we're running a little bit over. I just have a lot of ideas and I really like teaching about litter. So if you have any questions, please let me know or throw them in the chat around you.